Good evening, everyone. My name is Ware Harmon. I'm the Executive Director of Town Hall Seattle, and on behalf of our staff and our partners at LA Bay Book Company, it's a pleasure to welcome you to tonight's live stream presentation of Paul Shoemaker in conversation with Doug Baldwin, as part of our Arts and Culture series. As we get underway, I want to acknowledge that our institution stands on the unceded traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, and particularly the Duwamish. We thank them for our continued use of the natural resources of their ancestral homeland. And we thank you all for joining us here on our new streaming platform, myths.org. Like everything at Town Hall, it's decidedly a work in progress. So please don't hesitate to tell us about your experience at the address that you'll see below at the chat, in the chat. Tonight's conversation will run around 60 minutes, including the Q&A. Questions will be selected from those in the chat field at the bottom of the video. So please submit yours at any time. You can also text your questions to 206-504-2857. That number is below as well. We can't guarantee we'll be able to get to every question, but we'll try to get to as many as possible. For those who'd like to view the program with closed captions, click the CC button in the bottom right corner of your video player. Town Hall's adding new events and podcasts every day. Upcoming programs include the poet Ian Manuel discussing his life as a young convict freed through the work of Brian Stevenson's Innocence Project and his efforts to build a life on the other side of incarceration. Eric Johnson with the legendary novelist Thomas McGuane, encouraging us to imagine and pursue lives bigger than what's set before us in an increasingly material world. Gina Warren discussing the phenomenon of backyard chickens with a person who calls himself Chicken Mike. It's probably an authority in the matter. Authors including Sebastian Junger and Annette Gordon-Reed, who is here to talk about her fantastic new book on Juneteenth. And the 100th edition of our In the Moment podcast, celebrating co-hosts Ginny Palmer and Steve Scher. And finally, the latest appearance by the Bushwick Book Club, this time presenting original songs inspired by their readings of Angela Garbus's Like a Mother. You can check out more of what's upcoming by visiting our online calendar at townhallseattle.org. Our work is made possible through your support and the support of our sponsors. Arts and culture programs in particular are supported by 4Culture, Arts Fund, Seattle's Office of Arts and Culture, the Norcliffe Foundation, and the Wyncote Foundation Northwest. But as most of you watching know, at heart, Town Hall is a member-supported organization, and I want to thank all of our members watching tonight's broadcast. One last note, you'll want to dive deeper into tonight's conversation for sure by purchasing a copy of Paul Shoemaker's book, and I urge you to make that purchase tonight using the link in the chat below to buy directly through LA Bay Book Company. If you buy local, maybe the things that we love about Seattle from before the pandemic will still be around to sustain us and delight us on the other side. And with all that, Paul Shoemaker is the founding president of Social Venture Partners International, a global network of thousands of social innovators, entrepreneurs, philanthropists, and business and community leaders. Before that, he spent over a decade as a global thought leader through posts at Microsoft, Nestle, and other venues. He has spoken at TEDx and United Nations events, and he has written for the Stanford Social Innovation Review and the Huffington Post, and in book-length form through 2015. Can't Not Do, which is the occasion, I think, of his last onstage appearance at Town Hall, but I might be wrong about that. He'll correct me, I'm sure. Shoemaker has also recently launched a new podcast called Rebuilders, where he has conversations with emerging leaders, citizens, and futurists. Doug Baldwin spent 8 years in the NFL as a wide receiver with the Seattle Seahawks. He was with the Seahawks for their Super Bowl 48 win over the Broncos and played in 2 Pro Bowls over his career. If you're not a football fan, that means he was darn good at the position of wide receiver. He's a believer in redemption. He describes his years in the NFL as a time when he was both learning and unlearning identity. Raised in Florida, schooled in California, he's currently identifying as a proud husband and father, striving to better serve his community. Paul Shoemaker's new book, Taking Charge of Change, How Rebuilders Solve Hard Problems, is the subject of their talk this evening. Please join me in welcoming Doug Baldwin and Paul Shoemaker.
Thank you, Weir, and thank you, Doug, so much for joining me. You can take a break for a few minutes and hang out, and we'll come back and have a great conversation together. To everybody listening, just as a starting point, I'm not normally so literal, but one of the things I find is when I don't do these in person, I don't have as much of a chance to give you guys visual clues. So I'm going to give you 4 road signs for the next 16 minutes. First of all, I'm going to talk for a few minutes about why I wrote the book. Then I'm going to spend a minute or two on sort of how I did the research. I'm going to spend the bulk of the time on who this is about, profile the traits in 2 of those leaders, and I'll finish up with where the idea of Rebuilders comes from. So let's start with why. My elementary school years, I grew up in Fort Dodge, Iowa. If you don't know where Fort Dodge is, it's about halfway between Humboldt and Webster City. My dad was a Methodist minister. There were 2 Methodist churches in town. My dad partnered with the African-American church in town religiously. Pun intended, also true. I would tag along sometimes in our 63 Falcon. I can remember going to that church. It was in a part of the town called the Southeast Bottoms. Why would you call any part of any town that? When we would drive there, we would go by their community school. I could compare that with the school that I went to. And when the pastor would come to my dad's church, some people would just look at him and treat him differently. I can still vividly remember that church, that school, and the looks people gave that pastor. My young mind didn't yet know what to call economic, educational, racial inequity. So in 2018, nearly 50 years later, I was consulting on a project for Poverty in America. We were studying economic, educational, racial inequity, social health inequities impacting poverty. There is something missing in America's equation for addressing and confronting inequity. I do believe I know what part of it is. For the 50 years or so after World War II, America made steady but uneven, halting, choppy, but we were making progress on a long, steep mountain called economic, social, and health equity. At some point about 25 years ago, we took a wrong path and we have been going back down that mountain. It's not just the scale and the scope of inequities today. It is the pace and the downward path of inequity in America for the last 25 years that I'll say I didn't even fully grasp until I wrote the book. So just 3 brief data points. 1, economically, we all know about the gaps in wealth disparity. Today, we've reached a point where the top 1%, 3 million Americans, have as much wealth as 300 million other Americans. Socially, we were making progress on the education achievement gap for about 30 years. Somewhere around the turn of the century, we kind of leveled off. Then it's starting to widen a little bit again. And we know in 2020 that education gap widened significantly. We just don't know how much yet for millions of kids. And when it comes to health, we've increased the quantity of health, but the access to the quality of health has continued to widen and widen. You can live in 2 zip codes 6 miles apart in Seattle, and you can have a life expectancy that is 20 years apart. I could go on and on. So we read abundant analyses of the problem. There are a myriad of solutions that have been implemented. People are constantly trying new programs. What I don't believe we have done long and hard and well enough is think about the kinds of leaders that America needs to confront our inequities and reverse that 25-year trajectory I just described that we're on. So there's a question for America and for each of us. What are the vital leadership traits leaders are going to uniquely need in the most inequitable America in decades? So the next step for me was, how would I try to answer that question? So that's what I spent part of my time in 2019 doing. I'm not a researcher, not an analyst. I have spent 23 years working in the social sector. I'm a networker, and I've been deeply immersed in a lot of civic and social issues and challenges. So I did 3 areas of qualitative research on leaders, impact, and context. I talked to nearly 100 of the best, most effective leaders I'd come across in those 23 years. That started to generate a list of traits, a bunch of spreadsheets. What I also wanted to make sure of was I was talking to leaders and work that was having true social impact and starting to reverse those inequities of the last 25 years. That was a lot of Venn diagrams. And the third part was context. it's so important to understand the context for leaders today is so much complexity. We live in the most divided, siloed America we've had, and we don't know how long. We have technology and media that make it harder and harder to agree on a set of facts. There's just a range of challenges: cybersecurity, geopolitical, technology, rural-urban divide, climate, on and on, that are generational, they're historic, and they're truly at inflection points. So that section is sort of a bridge from the why to the who. And I want to share 4 slides briefly that will visually tie together, I hope, what I just talked about. Need to be made a co-host, Bruno, so I can share 4 slides. Hang tight. There we go. Thank you. And what I hope these 4 slides will do is link together what I just talked about and also frame up the next 9 minutes. So this represents what I just talked about, the how I arrived at the leaders that I talked about and profiled in the book. And I'll tell you more about them in a minute. Great leaders creating true social impact, and that bottom circle, complexities of the decade ahead, that circle seems to just keep growing and growing by the day, by the minute. The red circle in the middle of that intersection, those are the 5 traits that were common to all 3 of those vectors. So these are the 5 traits that emerged. I'm going to talk about and define 2 of these tonight in a little bit of detail and a little bit of description. The other 3, I'm just going to give you sort of a brief definition, and we can talk about them more in the conversation. Generosity mindset and 24/7 authenticity. We're going to talk about this more in just a minute. Data conviction. These are leaders that understand that data is an indispensable part of solving their challenges. They know it's strategic, not tactical. They know how to use data wisely, and just as important, they know how to not use data unwisely. The capacity for complexity. These are leaders that can take in non-linear, non-sequential information constantly, take it in, make sense of it, adopt it, and act on it with new information also coming in constantly. And cross-sector fluency. These are these leaders that have an ease and a natural movement across all 3 sectors: public, private, nonprofit, in a very non-episodic, non-transactional way. So these are the 5 leadership traits that I believe we uniquely need for the decade ahead to address the complexities and reverse the inequities that we face in America. And these are the 2 leaders that we're going to talk about tonight. The first one up there is Roseanne Haggerty. She is an exemplar of what we call generosity mindset. The dude down there on the left, we all know him. He's Doug Baldwin, and we're going to talk about 24/7 authenticity in just a minute. So one thing I want to sort of reemphasize to everyone is I am here not talking about leadership, say for strategy or culture or trust, or for MBAs or CEOs. I am here talking about leadership for the decade ahead, the kinds of leaders that will address the complexities and reverse the inequities in the most complex America we've had in nearly 100 years. All right, so the first person I want to talk to you about is Roseanne Haggerty. She was the person in the upper left picture. And one of those complexities I talked to you guys about was a divided, siloed America. What's the leadership trait that's going to guide us through that? The trait that I think is best tuned to meet the times is what I call generosity mindset. The first time I ever heard that phrase was from Roseanne Haggerty herself a couple of years ago. She was walking down the streets in New York City. We were talking about her work, and I got to a point where I asked her a question: how do you go into communities and talk about homelessness, such a contentious, complex issue, and how do you land effectively? She said almost reflexively, I have to take in a generosity mindset. This is someone that's given her whole career and whole life to this. When she was in college, her senior year, she lived next door to an apartment complex they called Homeless Hell. The day she graduated, she went next door and she started to work. Roseanne Haggerty is the CEO of Community Solutions. Their mission is to create a lasting end to homelessness without leaving anyone behind. I figured that might feel relevant to the audience here tonight. Here's a definition of generosity mindset. These are leaders that have a strategic focus on the ultimate goal. They get past all the diversions. They get the best from everyone, and they can make the whole greater than the sum of its parts. Easy words, extremely hard in execution. These people are masters of trust. That is their currency. I cannot think of a more important, scarcer natural resource these days than trust. Just to be clear, generosity mindset doesn't mean we're nicey nice. It's actually a very strategic approach that comes from a really strongly held mindset. And of the 5 traits, it's the most obvious when it's missing from a team or meeting or a community. So we can accept the world as it is, or we can find and build up more leaders with a generosity mindset like Roseanne Haggerty. So another one of those complexities I talked about was technology and hypermedia make it so hard. They deepen our divisions, and they make it so hard to sort of agree on what the truth and the facts are. The trait that I think is best tuned to meet the decade ahead is what I call 24/7 authenticity. The first time I met Doug Baldwin was thankfully not trying to tackle him on a football field. We met over lunch because he wanted to spend some time talking about his hopes and his ideas for the future to help the world after he was done playing. That should tell you something about him right there. So here's the definition of 24/7 authenticity. These are leaders with a persistent, consistent commitment to honesty, integrity, and particularly to personal accountability. These are leaders that are worthy of our belief. They're not false. They have a strong spirit and character. They're very scarce these days. 24/7 is constant. This has to be something that somebody lives all the time and has to be proactive. And in the world we live in, the leaders with this trait, they have to be relentless. The bar is high, and yet the leaders that can meet this bar, they're going to be incredibly invaluable in the future. When I wrote the book, I talked to 2 people in the book that were from the sports world. There was Doug and Alicia Valavanis, who's the general manager of WNBA Storm. Both of them were insistent that authenticity played a key role in the teams they were part of. Doug told me, if you're not authentic, you cannot build genuine, lasting relationships on a team. Without those relationships, you can't win because you need the team. There's a real synchronicity to that. Baldwin cares more about people knowing who he authentically is, and then you can decide if he's the kind of guy you want to hang out with. And part of his authenticity, to me, is speaking beyond the practice field, beyond the sports field. In 2016, Doug spoke out about Keith Lamont Scott and Terrence Crutcher. Voices like Baldwin's, the son of a police officer, comes from a place of deep, vitally needed in these times authenticity. So we can accept the world that is, or we can find and build up more leaders with 24/7 authenticity, like Doug Baldwin. Last part before I get to a conversation with Doug. So we went from why to how to who, and let me finish up on where. So just one more quick visual for everybody. I'm going to take you back to Fort Dodge. That's a bridge that runs through Snell Crawford Park. And that creek bed there, that's my dad and my brother walking down that creek bed. I used to go down there for summers, in the hot, humid summers, and I would sit underneath that bridge because I love listening to the cars go overhead. My C in physics, my freshman year of college, suggested I was not going to be an engineer of bridges, but I still love bridges. So every bridge has 3 parts: foundation, substructure, superstructure. Bridges in America are as strong as their underlying foundations. 2/3 of the bridges in America were built between 1950 and 2000. That same period of time where we were slowly building some progress on economic, social, and health inequity. So many bridges now are in a state of disrepair, in the same way that we've had gone the wrong direction for 25 years on equity. 40% of our bridges in America are in need of repair. 8% of them are in need of urgent rebuilding. The state of bridges in America is very evocative of civil society in America. That's why I call these leaders rebuilders. We have a fundamentally different America than we did 25 years ago. We need rebuilders for our bridges, for our communities, for our companies across the US. I wrote about 38 rebuilders in this book because I wanted everybody to be able to see themselves in some of them. I wanted the story of these rebuilders to be a call to action to everyone. Massive upheavals like 2020 can be times also for undoing old ways of thinking and working and being. That is where these rebuilders come in. In times like these, leadership is a seminal lever in civil society. So those leaders that show up with those 5 vital traits will not only be rebuilders for the future. I see them as genuine American heroes, people like Roseanne and people like Doug. So thank you for listening, folks. And Doug, it is awesome to be here with you tonight. It's been a while since we hung out. The first question I should start out with is just, what are you up to these days? How's life? I know we got a couple of kids in the equation, so just give the world a sense of what's Doug Baldwin up to.
Well, Paul, first and foremost, thank you for the opportunity, man. I really appreciate it. This has been a long time coming.
Yeah.
I'm sorry if you can hear the rain in the background. Seattle is giving us that beautiful.
It's all good, man.
Rain.
Yeah, sounds good to me.
No, right now I'm really just focused on my family. I got 2 daughters I'm raising. My wife and I will be celebrating our 4th year of marriage here in July. And so thank you. Coming into my own as I want to say as an adult on this side of things, right? 2 children and a wife, and just life is going really, really, really fast. And I want to make sure that I'm, I don't want to say getting it right, but I want to be focused on the right things. My daughters deserve that. My wife deserves that. My family deserves that. And so that's really what I'm fixated on, and aside from that, there's a lot of auxiliary things that are going on around us that I can't help but be connected to and be engaged with. So obviously the state of our society, our country, the world, and, really to your point, kind of asking like, where are we going? What's happening? And it's concerning to me because, again, I got 2 daughters and I want to be part of the solution to the problems that they're going to be facing when they're my age. So yeah, a mouthful, but that's where I'm at right now.
No, that's great, man. And like, we always say this, but the world, like, genuinely, it feels like it's so many inflection points, like genuinely, truly. Right. And I can tell everybody he is a deeply intentional guy about his kids, because we were looking for a date earlier that conflicted when he puts his kids to bed and he said, hey, let's find another date. So that is to your credit. So one part of your journey that I know I've been a part of a little bit is the family center you developed in Renton. So this has been a passion of yours for 2, 3, 4, or 5 years here. So just as a starting point, tell us about sort of why did that come up in the first place? How's it going? Has it been harder than you expected? Tell us a little bit about it.
Yeah. So the backstory is I grew up in Pensacola, Florida, and I spent a lot of time on the back end of the Salvation Army, which was a community center. Right? My mom worked in the front office and the administrative part of the Salvation Army. And so a lot of my time after school was spent at the community center. And what I realized, as I got older, going through high school and in college, and then obviously in the pros, I realized how profound that experience was for me, right? Growing up in an environment that I felt safe, I felt comfortable enough to be a kid, right? Like I got to explore, really be a child. But then you had all these volunteers that really just invested their time in all of us, right? Really cared about us. You had tutors, you had mentors, we had our coaches. You had people that you just saw on a day-to-day basis that you knew by name, by first name, and you could just tell they didn't want anything from you. They just loved you genuinely for who you were, right? As a kid, excuse me. And so that really it resonated with me. And I told myself, if I was able to make it to the NFL, right? And you always hear guys, creating a foundation and doing different things. The thing that I wanted to do was to create a community center similar to the one that I grew up in. And so when I landed here in Renton, I actually, the funny part of this story is I went to this teriyaki spot in Renton. It's called Mama's Teriyaki at the time. And I went there almost every day, right? And the lady didn't know who I was. She was just, this was right before the season started. And she was just really caring. It kind of gave me those vibes back home at the Salvation Army. And there was kids in her restaurant everywhere all the time. And so I, one day I asked her, I said, why are these kids here? And she said, she don't know. They just come and hang out. And, she doesn't kick them out. So they're there to hang out. And so I asked the kids like, hey, I'm a basketball fan. I love basketball. So I asked them, I said, where's the nearest community center? I want to go play basketball. And it was further than I had wanted it to be.
Yeah.
Right. And I talked to the kids and I'm like, hey, what do you guys do? Why are you always hanging out here? And the sentiment I got was they really didn't have anywhere else to be. And so long story short, I talked to the city, talked to the mayor, Dennis Law at the time, and great guy, great leader. And, we came up with this decision that we were going to build this community center in Renton. And so that community center, it is kind of based on what I grew up in, but because now we have the resources and I'm bringing it to the 21st century, we're throwing everything that we can into it. So I partnered with Health Point. They're going to have a 2,500 square foot footprint of space where they're going to serve the community's health needs. We got a maker space for a school that's right next door. So kids are going to come over, use our technology. We got a gym. We got a basketball court. We have classrooms. We're going to provide healthy eating, healthy cooking classes right next to a demo kitchen, while also providing financial literacy classes. We're just going to pack it with everything that we can to serve the community. Things that I think for me as a child really impacted me, but also things that I wish I had exposure to, and also things that the community are looking forward to. So it's going well. It's been a long process. It's been 6 years, actually. COVID kind of slowed us down in the campaign to get money to build it. We're really, really close, actually, right now. We're anticipating we're going to break ground here in the summer. I've been saying that for a really long time, so fingers crossed, but it's looking optimistic right now.
That's awesome. So I think that's called either paying it forward or paying it back. I'm not sure which one it is. You strike me as a guy that sort of like in these evolutions and these stages you go through life, you always sort of like pick something from the stage before and you take it forward and it kind of evolves you as a person, as a man. I'm not trying to be a psychoanalyst. That's just sort of the way I view you, which is cool. So you put so much into Renton. So we've talked family, we've talked Renton. I know you're involved in other stuff. You got that thing on your t-shirt there. What else is going on in your world that you think you want us to know about? Let's sort of go out in concentric circles.
Good question. There's a lot going on.
Yeah. You can pick the things that matter the most to you.
Quite honestly, like there's a lot of things that are going on in terms of business, in terms of opportunities, and some things that I can't even talk about just yet, right? That I'm really excited about. But quite honestly, what I'm really, really focused on right now is figuring out who I am, right? And how I am showing up in this time and in this era, right? Quite honestly, I'm a Christian. And I really lean heavily on my Christian beliefs and my Christian background. Now, when I say a Christian, I don't mean Old Testament, anti-human being.
Faith, spirituality, right?
No, yeah. What I believe in is loving God and loving your neighbor, right? Period. That's what Jesus told me to do, was love my neighbor as myself. And so with that in mind, my thought process of, how do I impact the world the way that Jesus would want me to, right? How do I be thoughtful, impactful, empathetic, authentic, kind, generous, all of the things that I want to exemplify in a world that's really created for those who are selfish, are greedy, just being candid, capitalism. I think capitalism was a genius idea because it lends itself to the natural state of humans to be greedy, right? But at some point, we have to get back in touch with our humanity and realize that we are all human beings on this rock that's floating through space, trying to survive, and if we don't have that mindset, then what are we doing, So to answer your question, I guess, as clearly and as concise as I can, I'm really focused on looking internally and reflecting on, my process to this point as a human, how it impacts my children, my wife, and then trying to build a fortified idea to then take out into the world to impact change. But, people say you can't solve problems outside of your home until you solve the problems within your home. So, I'm trying to make sure that I have a very clear understanding of who I am before I go out and share that with the world.
Yep. For whatever it's worth, Doug, I always experienced you over the years as a deeply intentional guy. If anybody asked me like one word to describe Doug Baldwin, it would be intentional. And it's interesting. Most of the people that fit this 24/7 authenticity profile in the book, this was not something I tried to manufacture. Almost every one of them has an element of spirituality or faith that is strongly held in their life. So you are right along with them. So I wrote about you in the book is very authentic and intentional. And everything you just talked about right there, like, where does that come from in your life? And I'm curious, does it get harder to show up that way in the world we are in today and in the future, or does that not have an effect? So where does that sort of intention about your faith and who you are as a person come from? Do you think that's going to get harder to live that way in the years ahead?
That's a really good question. To answer your first question, like I've always had a connection to the church, right?
Okay.
So the spirituality, the connection to God, like that's always been there. I don't think it really dived into a real relationship until later in my life. You know, probably I want to say maybe 5-6 years ago is when I dove into it more in an intentional way with creating a real relationship. But then also, I just think that I'm in a unique position. My generation is in a unique position to see the world from really, really different views, right? Like I grew up hearing the internet, the dial-up internet, right? Like we didn't, you know what I mean? Like we didn't have mobile phones. We didn't have the internet at our fingertips at that age. That
was probably
age.
a gift.
It was. I believe so.
Yeah.
Right? We don't have the complexities, the problems that the new generation has. But I say that because, you know, we kind of had a foot in both worlds. We had a foot in a world where, you know, you couldn't log on to MySpace unless you were sitting down at a desk waiting for the dial-up to go through. And it took time, right? But now we're walking around and we have social media and the internet at our fingertips. And so, you know, being one of those people who, you know, just really likes to reflect and observe on how society is adapting and evolving and changing, I really see the clear distinctions between that world and this world. And also I have a 19-year-old brother. We're 13 years apart. So I'm getting to see this new evolution of time through his eyes as well and how it's impacting him, right? And I think all of us, as adults, as we get older, I would hope at some point we realize that when we become the adults in the room, it's our job to start working on the problems that our children are going to face in the future, right? So I told my brother this the other day, like, you know, the things that the impact that social media and the connectivity that they have, the impact and the positive and the negative consequences of that, they're not going to show up for another 20, 30 years, right? But for us, for you and I, and for other like-minded individuals, it's our job to start thinking about what those problems look like so we can start laying the foundation for our children to have a better world, or at least have an attempt to be able to solve those problems or mitigate those problems in the future. And so that's where that comes from. But I think also the motivation to try to look at those problems, solve those problems, or at least attack those problems comes from, you know, having a brother who's 19 years old and going through it right now.
Yep. As an author, selfishly, to have someone represent the ideas of the book so well is very cool. So there's a question that somebody listening asked. I'm going to pop back and forth between my questions and theirs, but this one's right on topic. They wonder what influences your search for yourself and what are the tools and resources you are using. So I guess this is, if you're giving anybody advice to sort of go on the journey you've been on, you know, what would you tell them? What resources, tools, pathway did you take?
You know, I
other than the Bible.
Right. You know, I kind of take a different approach when I think about this. Okay. I try to eliminate anything that would seem like to be a privilege, right? So we have access to the internet, we have access to resources, but there's some people in other countries and other places that don't have access to those things. So then I ask myself, so how do they do it, right? And there's three values that I live by. And these things you can live by regardless if, you know, you have internet access, if you have resources, if you have, you know, whatever it may be. Number one is just be honest, right? And that means not only being honest with other people, but also being honest with yourself.
Yeah.
You know, truly looking in the mirror and saying, who is this person? How is this person showing up? And really observing that person in different environments, right? If you don't know who you are, then how can you address the problems that you have under your, you know, under your personality? And then also being honest with other people so that you can get that feedback, right? And then you can also learn and grow from different perspectives. But there's another part of that, you know, number two is curiosity. And curiosity really is just having a posture of being humble, of knowing that you don't have the answers, that there's other perspectives out there that you can learn from that will maybe reinforce your perspective or change your perspective so that you can grow in a different way, right? And then the third one, probably the most important one, is be forgiving, right? We're all human beings. We're going to fuck up. You know, that's just life. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to do things that we shouldn't do. But be forgiving about that. Give yourself grace, right? When you make mistakes, you know, be authentically apologetic about those mistakes, right? And give yourself grace so that you can learn from those mistakes and then move on. And then vice versa, when somebody else causes you harm, you know, be willing to forgive them as well, because there's also a lesson in there for you as well, right? And so those three things is what I would say, you know, aside from everything else. Like, I have 3 different therapists I go see, right? There's a lot of different resources that I use. I read a lot of books. I spend a lot of time meditating, just thinking about, you know, if I'm in a social setting, in a social situation, how did I do, right? Was I authentically myself? Were there moments where I felt uncomfortable? Why did I feel uncomfortable? Were there times when I didn't show my true self? Why did I not show my true self, right? And really taking the time to reflect on those things and then ask those questions and then try to find those answers. All of those things you can do without having resources, without having money, right? Those things are important to me and just my natural progression and evolution as a human being. Yep. But again, you know, if you're asking me, give somebody advice, you can do those things without having any other resources.
Yep. I think especially the honesty with yourself piece, which I kind of call personal accountability. I think that is so vital because so few people, that's a high bar, right? Because the easiest person to lie to is yourself, because you can get away with it, right? Nobody knows it. Nobody has to know it. So that is actually the highest of all bars. You know, I'm curious. This is an observation, you know, since you started being the public eye, and I saw you play a game at Stanford and then up here and stuff, you seem like a human being that you were thinking on this stuff over the last 10 to 15 years has really evolved. And you sort of gone through like stages of evolution. And a minute ago, you said it was 5 or 6 years ago where you really sort of dove into your sense of spirituality. So is that an accurate statement? And if so, were there sort of like inflection points or people, were there events? Like what has sort of guided Doug to kind of evolve yourself over those time? And if I'm wrong, just tell me I'm full of crap.
No, you're right. I wanted to piggyback off something you just said about the reflection of being honest with yourself. So we had a saying, Richard Sherman and I, we always used to, when we joke back and forth with each other about things that we would, not necessarily tell each other the truth or just be joking with each other. He said, look, you can lie to me, just don't lie to yourself. Right? That was a phrase that we always said to keep each other accountable in that way. But to your point about 5 to 6 years ago, what happened was I met my wife. And she,
I can relate to that.
She's just an incredible human being. She has an incredible story, an incredible background, but similarly to what I've been trying to emulate, she's really taken the time to reflect on who she is, right? And really understand the depths of her pain so that she can enjoy the depths of joy from that pain, right? And she was the example for me in that. And, we had some hard times. We had some dark times when I was young and immature and young-minded, and she taught me differently. She showed me a different kind of love. And man, I mean, from that, once you get caught up and you feel that kind of love, like you don't want to let it go, right? And just me naturally being a student and being curious, I just wanted to learn more and more about it, right? Where does it come from? Where does it originate? Like, and then how do we know to be so attracted to this,
Yep.
right? That was really fascinating to me. And so that drove me to do, research and a lot of scholarly evidence and research. But what I really come down and back to was, this was a spiritual thing. And so I've been connected to that ever since.
Yep. There's also a little bit of just good fortune. You met this person somewhere on the way, right? I reflected on my wife. I've been married a few more years than you, and I would not be the human being I am, not even close, without her. And I'm thankful that, right, the right thing sort of came together at the right time.
Yeah.
Go out a little bit more. You are an athlete. Now you're a former athlete. I'm not sure. Do I call you that?
I'm still an athlete.
Okay.
I'm still an athlete.
You're not an NFL, you're a former NFL player, but you're still an athlete.
Correct. There you go.
And especially the last few years, more athletes have spoken out on social issues.
Mhm.
You're one of them. Lots of them have. 5 years ago, not as many. And of course, 15 years ago, there was the Michael Jordan Republicans buy Nikes comment. There's been such an evolution since then. And from my bias view, it seems like they can have a real impact. I know you've been a part of a few efforts. Where's your sort of mindset on you as an athlete and a former pro athlete, your role in and/or athletes' roles in speaking out on social issues? Like some people say, hey, play the game. I don't agree with that. But how do you think about the role you and athletes play and the impact you can have on social issues?
Yeah. I get asked this question all the time.
Okay.
And my answer has slowly evolved to this. And my answer is that, it's not about athletes playing a role. It's just about human beings playing a role, right? Like if you see something in our society that's not right, then stand up for it. Stand up against it, right? Like effectuate change. Whether you're an athlete or a doctor, a lawyer, a teacher, a fireman, a police officer, it doesn't matter who you are. You have a role in the bigger picture. The bigger scheme of this is that we are all human beings trying to press forward in progress. And yes, you could say that athletes have kind of a more unique role because they have a platform, right? They have a megaphone that more people listen to, or at least more people have access to. But, that doesn't necessarily mean that the person who's, yelling in the microphone or the megaphone is saying the right stuff either, right?
Yep.
So it's still the person, the role of the person who may not have as big of a megaphone to understand the complexities of the problems to also stand up and use their voice, right? I can't tell you how many times people who, again, aren't athletes, don't have a megaphone, don't have a platform, but have influenced the way that I believe and see things, the way that my perspective has changed over time, right? And you need that. You need to be in conversation, in dialogue, in relationship with people so that you can grow and so that you can see other perspectives. And so when you ask me, what is the role of the athlete? I think the role of the athlete is no different than any other human being. If you see something in the world that is wrong, then you should say something.
Yep. Yep. This is about you, not about me. I will say the last 14 months, especially since May 25th, have made me reflect as a white man, what's my role in the world? I understood how much I didn't know. And I've had a conversation with a handful of African-American friends that have really been powerful in understanding what's my friendship, what's my allyship, what do I need to learn from them? How can I help them? Right. It's been really powerful stuff. Somebody asked in the chat another really good question. The past year has shown us the importance of leadership. Also that we have a devastating lack of it. Have you in the past year seen people stepping up and filling the deficit, or people kind of stuck figuring out what to do? Any personal stories you can share about people stepping up and filling that deficit?
Yeah, I think I shared this with you a while ago. This might have been maybe a year ago. I think I told you, I felt like the world, our society was going through a collective depression.
Yep.
I just felt that, I felt it in myself, just looking out in the world. Quite honestly, I think the last administration had a lot to do with that. But just, hearing people talk and seeing what's in the media, what's popular, what's going on in the world, it just felt like we were in a collective depression. And to your point, or to the person asking this question, I also felt like there was a genuine lack of leadership. Everybody was kind of scrambling for influence, scrambling to get on top, like crabs in a bucket, right? But I also felt like people were craving genuine leadership. Society is craving real leadership. Society is looking for somebody to say, hey, we're going in this direction, and getting behind that person for genuine reasons, right? I think it's going to take a very heavy movement to get to that place. I think we are on the cusp of it. I do believe that. But I think because we're in a time where technology has advanced and evolved much quicker than we have as humans, right? It's taking us some time to catch up. And it's going to take some of the leaders of the past, I want to say my generation. I think it may be a little bit earlier than my generation. Those people who have the experience in a world that is vastly different than what we're living in today, but have the perspective to say, here's the problems that I foresee, and here's how we're going to go attack those, right? And in regards to that type of relationship, or that type of leadership, is really relationship, right? We're getting so far away from genuine human connection.
Yep.
I see it in my 19-year-old brother and his friends, right? They don't have the experience of going outside all day and playing and using their imagination to play together.
Yep.
They're on social media, they're on video games, and it's just a different world. And so the things that are really going to stand out, in my opinion, are things that go back to that human connection, right? And to your point, it's about all of those things that you talked about, being generous, having being authentic. Like, it's really hard to engage with somebody over a virtual world, because you're in a virtual world where you don't really have to demonstrate your true self, as opposed to being in person and engaged in a relationship consistently and constantly. I think that is going to be way more profound for the next generations to see that, to model that, and also for it to be what we will deem as leaders in the coming future.
This will sound like I'm plugging the book. I'm not. Those two qualities of authenticity and generosity mindset, you just said it. Genuinely, I think those matter in part because of the context you just talked about. And I think it's more rare and unique. And the leaders that can really show up with those two qualities are going to be enormously valuable. Mm-hmm. And by the way, if we don't have enough of them show up, we're really in a shit ton of trouble. Right? So opportunity, if we find enough of them to show up, and if we don't have them, it really worries me. Somebody asked a question here. Can you both talk about your perspectives on the private sector? Like, should we be leaning on corporate leaders, or do you think that's important, or something we shouldn't pay too much attention to? I'll take a first shot at it. You can answer it if you want to or not. I think one part of this is we could have a conversation. You kind of touched on this, Doug. Like, how much power should the private sector have? And that's an interesting conversation. In some ways, too much right now. If you're Facebook, way too much, but that's a whole nother conversation. But having said that, in the last 18 months, there have been times where I am thankful that people with private sector leadership have spoken up. A guy I know at Policy Link in Oakland, Michael McAfee, he's really good at talking about telling private sector leaders, you guys have the lever, you people, you men and women, you have the levers of power. What are you going to use them for? So that power exists. So they have that lever. What are they going to do with it? And I will say that the last year encourages me. In the fourth quarter of this year, Doug, I did a project for them that was, the subject was racial equity in corporate America. And I talked to about 40 CEOs, and they were sort of trying to figure out you know, May 25th happened. You all said a bunch of stuff in the summer. Now, where the hell are you at and what are you really going to do about this stuff? And I will say that, you know, there's some fakers, but I think the curve moved. And I do think some corporate sector leaders have changed. I do think they see more than just the bottom line profit. They see their people and they see their purpose. And I'm encouraged by it. And then the last part of it is, I do think they're also going to do that, not just because they want to, but because they have to. And not just their customers and their supply chain, more than anything, the Gen Zs and the millennials, the talent coming into their companies, they're not going to show up if their companies don't act in a responsible way to make a positive difference in the world. Yeah. So that's a little bit of a robust answer. You can take that on or defer on that one if you want to. Anything you want to say on that?
No, I agree with, I think mostly everything you said. Okay. I will say, I don't like the structure of the question. Let me say that.
Yeah.
You know, whether you're a corporate leader or a sports leader or a political leader, how we should be evaluating our leaders is really on their moral compass, right? What values do they express and do they translate to us, right? And not just through the PR machine that we've seen, right? And when I say PR machine, I mean that wholeheartedly hating the PR machine because I was in the entertainment business, yep. Right? I know what it looks like.
You know what it looks like. And
it's our job as citizens, as you know, people trying to survive on this rock, to be intentional and be thoughtful about how we evaluate those types of leaders. Are they being honest? Are they being real? You know, are they being considerate and thoughtful of other human beings? And that doesn't mean that they're perfect, right? That doesn't mean that they're perfect. And, you know, I want to actually qualify this when the difference between good people and bad people, good people do bad things, but they're remorseful about their bad things. And then they try not to do those bad things again, right? Bad people do bad things. They're proud about the bad things they do, and they lie about the bad things they do, yep. Right? And we have to get good at deciphering who those people are, right? Because there's a lot of bullshit they're going to tell us and show us. We have to become experts in deciphering what's real and what's not. And if we don't, to your point, we're going to look up 30 years from now, we're going to be in trouble. And I'm one of these people who believe that, you know, again, I'm going to go back to my religious beliefs, my spiritual beliefs. History just merely repeats itself. There's nothing new under the sun, right? We're in a time and an element in space, and I'm not trying to be, a super pessimistic person here, but I think we're in a time where there is a race for leadership right now, yep. Right? There is a battle between who's going to be, you know, the dominant figure, the dominant leader. We've seen what, you know, somebody can get up and say that they shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue and get away with it, or call other countries shithole countries, mm-hmm. Right? And still be looked at as a good leader, right? A thoughtful, kind leader. We've seen that, right? There's a battle going on. There's a race going on. And so I think we're in a specific time where we have to be very intentional about not looking and saying corporate leaders or sports leaders. No, we need to look and find who are the leaders, period.
Yep. That's great. I'm going to ask you one more question. This is really good. It's so hard to talk to people we don't agree with. Do you have any tips on how to make a connection with people on the other side of the aisle? And I know that you walk into situations sometimes where you talk to audiences and groups that you guys don't see the world the same way, but you find a way to have an authentic conversation, to find a bridge, because it's an important part of the work that you're doing. So talk to us about how you make a connection, an authentic connection with people that you don't necessarily agree with on the other side of the aisle, whatever that aisle is.
Yeah. The person who asked this question, I guarantee you know the answer.
I do know the answer.
How do you solve any conflict? How do you solve any problem, any human problem? You have to be in conversation. You have to be in relationship, right? You have to and it takes a lot of time, but you have to take that time. You know, my wife and I, we don't agree on everything. And when we don't agree, like we have to be in conversation about it. You know, I really have to see her perspective. She has to see my perspective. And then we're going to teach each other things, right? And as we go about teaching each other things and seeing each other's perspective, then my perspective is broadened, her perspective is broadened. And then we may even land on a conclusion that neither one of us brought up in the first place, right? But being able to be in that conversation, be in that relationship and grow together, even if you don't see eye to eye, that's the key to it, right? And I think the most difficult part of saying that to people is because that's, you know, it's not the simple answer. It's not the easy answer. It takes time. Just like any other problem we face in society, it's going to take time. You have to be in connection with other human beings to solve these human being problems. And so, yeah, that's that when you're in a situation where you're talking to an audience or people who don't disagree with you and maybe even strongly disagree with you, take an honest approach to humble yourself and be curious, and then also be forgiving in the process.
One more quick question I'm add on, Doug. Is there any one more thing that you're going to be doing in the future that's coming up that you want us to know about? Hey, here's what's next for Doug. What's on your t-shirts? Is there something coming up that's next for you that you want us to know about or not?
You know, honestly, I no.
Okay.
But I want to preface it with this. You know, I really don't know what's coming up, right? I don't know I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, right? I have ideas and plans in my head, but I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow. But what I will say is that what I'm really focused on is making sure that I am connected with my family so that my perspective can grow, right? You know, and when I say connected to my family, I mean in an authentic, very reflective, very empathic, you know, just I'm trying to get grounded.
Yeah.
I'm trying to get as grounded as I possibly can, because I genuinely believe that if I am grounded and if I find ways to stay grounded, if I put people around me that keep me grounded, whatever field I go into or whatever problem I'm trying to solve, I'm going to be halfway there because I have that foundation. And so regardless of what I get into, regardless of what you see me get into, like I hope that, you know, not only for people to see, but also for myself, knowing that I am working hard on being grounded so that when I do enter whatever space I enter into, that I'm well equipped to do it in an authentic and a real way.
Yep. So I look forward to our next lunch at Jack's. We should be getting close to that. It's been way too long. I could talk to you for another hour. And I cannot thank you enough for bringing your real self, which is the only self you've got. I know that. And to folks listening, I hope you feel a sense of what 24/7 authenticity looks like. I can't thank you enough, Doug. It's been great talking to you. And I look forward to our next conversation, whether it's over a beer or at the community center or whatever the case may be. Thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, absolutely, Paul. Thank you. Thank you for writing the book. Thank you for taking this topic on. And obviously, thank you for giving me the opportunity to hang out with you for a little bit.
Absolutely. I got one more minute, Candace, and I'll turn it back to you. Practical thing. I tell folks when I wrote this book, I wanted everybody to be able to see themselves in it and to be inspired and to be a call to action. So tangibly, number one, buy the book from Bill Elliott Bay. Number two, I have a podcast called The Rebuilders. Please subscribe to it. Number three, I put a discussion guide on my website. Last thought, I was putting the finishing touches on this book in early February of 2020. I will say I was writing the book that my head said I wanted to write. And then 2020 happened. There's 100-year-old expression that says there are decades when nothing happened and there are weeks when decades happen. We all lived 2020. There was more than 1 week when a decade happened in 2020. So I thought I was almost done in February 2020. My final edit was on November 1st of 2020. And the reason that was because I had to keep updating that and tuning that message. Just like all these leaders I talked to in the book, it needs to be relevant. And I will say this, by the time I got done with it, I had written a book now that I thought my book told my heart that I had to write. And that sounds a little bit corny, but it's genuinely true. I am worried about America in the dark of the night. I'm optimistic in the light of the day. because of people like you. We live in a much more unequaled, siloed, complex, fractured America than we ever could have imagined even one generation ago. At the end of the day, though, we have to get this right for America, for the world, for our families, and for places like Seattle. So thank you again, Doug. To everybody listening tonight, thank you guys so much. The questions were wonderful. And thank you, Town Hall. And Candace, I'll hand it back to you.
Yeah, thank you both so much for joining us tonight. As we were talking, I just thought, this is so relevant for new leaders, but also for leaders that have been around and are kind of reevaluating. So thank you so much for your insights. It's been great having you. I'm going to say just what you said, Paul. If you are interested in purchasing a copy of the book, please use the link in the chat. That's going to take you right over to Elliott Bay so we can support a local bookstore. And hopefully we'll be open soon and we can have you both in the building again coming up here pretty soon. But until then, I hope you stay safe and have a great night.
Thanks, everybody.